Hello, friends. My name is host Eric, and I am the host of Talking with Famous People. I'm here to tell you tonight that as a YouTuber who loves his community, I'm committing the following resource to your well-being. If at any point you, viewer, are being chased by a wild animal, and I happen to be nearby, you are invited, you have a standing invitation, to hide inside of my mouth. Now, I'm not promising it's going to smell good in there. I'm not promising it's going to be dry. I'm not promising you're going to enjoy the experience. I'm not promising you can fit into my mouth, nor am I promising to facilitate your entry thereinto. But I am promising that you have my permission to hide in my mouth should you find yourself being chased by a wild animal and happen to run into me. That's a standing offer that anyone is welcome to take me up on. So if you're being chased by a wild animal, you run into me, you can say, "Hey, can I hide in your mouth?" And I will say, "Yes, you can." Or "Yes, you may." I guess I'll just have to endure it if you try to climb into my mouth. At least give you a chance. You can't hurt me, though, in the process. So you have to be pretty small. Like this big. What's the most advantageous body part to hide within said chambers? Nobody's allowed to hide any part of their body in my mouth. They can only hide their whole selves in my mouth. And only in the context where they're being chased by a wild animal. And they must do it without harming me. But the offer is open to everybody who's a viewer of this channel, whether you're a subscriber or not. Even if you're just a casual passerby, even if you're a hater. If you are being chased by a wild animal, and you see me, run into me, and you can say, "Can I hide in your mouth?" And I will answer, "Yes, you may." And if you are very small, that might work out for you. You decline my offer? Well, you're not even being chased by a wild animal, so there is no offer. You have not met the conditions for there to be an offer standing at the moment, actually. So, first, if you really want to decline my offer, you need to get chased by a wild animal. All the way to wherever I am. That's the key. Okay. Are you considered doing a 24/7 subathon? No. Is that a thing? Is that a real thing, or did you just make it up right now? No, it's not acceptance that comes to those who wait for the wild animal. It's mostly boredom. Waiting is one of life's more boring activities. Right up there with waiting. What's more boring than waiting? It is a thing. So you go, but how can you do it for 24/7? I mean, like, oh, you including your sleeping times? You take the stream with you while you sleep? Well, there's no way I'm going to be able to do 31 days straight because, yeah, is there something more boring than waiting? What's more boring than waiting? See, but the thing is, I got my setup out here and I don't sleep out here, so I could do 24 hours maybe, but I'm not going to do it for 31 days straight. I mean, I guess I could have the stream going continually and try to be out here as much as possible for like a week or something, but there'd be some stretches of it where it would just be the empty room, you know. But I like that idea, Eric Thor. Thank you for introducing it to me. I'm curious how your conversation the other day with Melissa Talks went. Almost curious enough to watch the video, but I'm afraid it's gonna make me mad, so I don't want to watch it. How many people do you think would watch your live stream while you were sleeping? I mean, the thing is, the interesting thing is, of course, 6 to 8 people would be here because those same people aren't really here to watch the live stream exactly anyway. They're here to chat with each other and me, but if I'm not here, there's still each other to chat with, so it's not like I'm doing a little song and dance up here, wiggling my tush to entertain everybody. It's just, I'm just enabled to... Did you talk about her not being an ENTP? Or did that not come up? So anyway, it's been a very choppy seas lately. Not necessarily bad, but a lot of drama, a lot of heat and energy and things, and that included tonight, like just to sort of top it all off. So after I was like, oh fuck, I fucked up that Jordan Peterson video. I misattributed to him a warrant that he didn't make that I said he made. And at first I thought, no, he made that. But I realized the reason and I never fuck that shit up like that. I just don't. But because I hate having to do these retraction videos like I gotta do tomorrow on this thing. And I'll put the retraction video up first, then I'll take down the old videos. Then I'll have to put up a new video covering the same topic, but be right about Jordan Peterson instead of wrong about him. So you know I didn't do this shit on purpose, okay? But what happened was this. I had this piece of paper, right? Like if I were going to deal with something from an argumentational standpoint, I'd flow it out like I did with the Melissa Talks thing, where I had written out every single one of her points, right? But what I was preparing about Jordan Peterson for was not to make that video that I ended up making. I was preparing for Jordan Peterson to make jokey videos with that little doll that I had. So I wrote down a bunch of like individual statements that he made from multiple videos, okay? So that I could copy him better on both sides, right? The thing is, then I made some stretches of me riffing Jordan Peterson with that doll, and I figured I'd edit it down to just a good little chunk, right? And the thing is, I watched chunks from multiple videos to get to this piece of paper, and what I was saying about him relating women being hardwired to agreeability was something that's correctly attributed to him. But it was not the reason he gave as to why they don't watch his YouTube channel. And because I wasn't watching those videos in the first place for argumentational purposes, and because I did watch them and write shit down, so I had extra stuff to remember, and because I then made those little comedy videos in which it really looked like Jordan Peterson, actually. It was a pretty good little doll setup I had going on there. Somehow I got, when I made the video, I was quite confident what I was saying was correct. That he had made the claim that the reason people don't watch his YouTube channel is because women don't watch his YouTube channels because they're hardwired. But that I got jumbled there in the process because, like I said, it wasn't until later after I made the doll stuff that I thought I'd been thinking more about the Jordan Peterson stuff and the larger implications of it. And in that larger video in which I discussed those matters as a whole, I was very happy with that video, but it's completely destroyed by the fact that I defame Jordan Peterson by misattributing to him something he never said. So I got to fix that. I have nothing against Jordan Peterson at all, actually. I see him as a somewhat tragic character because I see him as operating under a terribly flawed framework. In other words, evolutionary psychology is completely bullshit. But regardless of that, I see him as struggling to be a good person and say good narratives to the best of his ability in a complex world that he doesn't quite get. The reason he doesn't quite get it, he doesn't have the right metaframe, which is cognitive functions. In other words, he never begins his lectures by saying, why am I, Jordan Peterson, making this lecture about this thing in this context? Yeah, I know. I apparently, like I said, I was never originally watching those videos for argumentation shit. And so I was sloppy and it came back and bit me in the ass. And I got to make a retraction video and stuff now, you know? So that's just me being late. Not even lazy. It was sort of like, I guess I had to make this mistake once to remember to be more careful, especially if I'm abruptly shifting gears like that, because I've got to transition from a context in which I don't have to be precise about what he's saying into a context in which I do, and I need to review the original source material, not the jokey shit I made about it that's in between. After the jokey shit I made about it that's in between, it's kind of like a fourth slot. That's what I think. Well, see, that's the thing, Eric Thor. The reason what he's saying is bullshit, regardless, is that I'm about 50-50. And the thing is, Eric Thor, there's plenty of reason to think that you're not a good comparison with Jordan Peterson. In other words, he can point to lots of other differentiations between him and you that would account for you being more popular with women. And the number one thing that anybody could point to is that you're a very handsome and socially graceful fellow, right? Young, handsome, and socially graceful. And not particularly combative, argumentative, or a force of affirmations that are in some way adversarial. So there's lots of good reasons why women would be very attracted to your channel. But congratulations for that pimp, big pimp. 65% is incredible. But I'm pretty proud of my demographics. I never wanted it to be a sausage party around here. I knew that. I knew I never wanted it to be a sausage party because sausage parties are boring. So the thing is, the point though is this: all those same things that he could say about Eric Thor. Well, that anybody should say that's not a good comparison. That's not true of me. I am a good comparison. I have very similar politics to Jordan Peterson. I talk about similar amount of abstract kind of shit. I'm about psychology. I'm old like him. I'm not conventionally attractive in the same way that he's maybe not. I mean, he's probably more attractive than me, but whatever. You get the idea that he can't point to anything to explain that difference, right? It's very difficult to explain that difference unless you use my explanation, which is because he's committed to this scienciness thing. What that fundamentally means is that he's always going to err on the side of collapsing shit down to biology and or evolutionary psychology or whatever. And what that means when he's talking about any kind of sexual selection, it means he's going to frame everything through sort of sexual selection, sexual success on some level, because even though it's completely bullshit, evolution retains some aspect of that in its ideation, right? So it means that women are going to feel as though they've been reduced to baby machines that are being controlled by their baby making urges. And men who feel wronged by women are going to like that, because then it's not their fault that they're not getting laid. I'm not quite 50-50. I got like 55-45 or something like that. Men, a few more men. But yeah, there are a lot of chicks around here, which is great. It makes for a real environment, a real community uh, when you have enough chicks around. And if you don't, then it's just lame. Everything's just lame. Like, what are we gonna do? Go drag racing in our cars or something? Let's get out our power tools and cut some wood or something. Or talk about chicks. Or, you know, talk about how, man, it's lame, there's not any chicks here. Or talk about how, man, chicks are lame, they're not hanging out with me. Nobody wants a sausage party is the point. I don't envy Jordan Peterson in that regard for sure. I don't want just a bunch of sort of lost, angsty young men, mostly, as my audience, trying to find in me legitimization of their unhealthy narratives. That's not a good thing. I think that's what's going on a lot with him, but hopefully it's not that bad. Hopefully a lot of people, regardless of whether they want to or not, end up learning to be a little more depth in their thinking than that just by watching him. Those lads just want to pops. I've had a few people sort of project father figure onto me in a fairly explicit way. It didn't really bother me exactly, but it doesn't seem to be. I don't feel that sense. Like, it's clear that Jordan Peterson sees himself as having some sort of mission or duty, which is noble, which I see as noble, and I value. When I see him crying and taking shit seriously, I see myself in him in a lot of ways. I value and appreciate the fact that that he's not a relativist at all. That he's committed to his narratives as as exclusively true, But the problem is he thinks he can always ignore the larger framing issues if he can back up whatever he's saying with a lot of studies and stuff, The larger framing issue is if you're an evolutionary psychologist, then everything is fruit from that poisonous tree. Careful what I wish. I mean, I do wish I had that big of an audience. I'm just saying I don't want to have an audience that's getting off on something that's I don't want to be part of the problem. Because it is the case that Jordan Peterson has good reason to think there's a problem in Paradigm Town, right? There is a problem in Paradigm Town. But he's totally wrong to understand in his assertion of a single rationalist paradigm as comparatively preferable without contextualizing it enough. And he can't contextualize it enough because he sees the reason why he's advocating that thing as being because he's right, rather than because he's projecting his frame biases. So he's wrong about that first question is the problem, right? I don't think that the reason I'm making the arguments I'm making is because I'm right. I think it's because I'm expressing my cognitive functions and projecting my frame biases. if I limit my expression of those projection of those frame biases into contexts that are appropriate and complementary to those frame biases, then I can be right. But if I don't limit it, then I won't be right. And regardless, that's not why I'm doing it. In other words, my way of being is such that it can only sustain itself when it can sustainably retain the claim that I'm right. But well, for me, it's not why I do things, because not absolute value. Because I fucked up, men like gods, and I attributed to him as a warrant. I took two disconnected things that he said, and I connected them as though he warranted the latter with the former when he didn't. It was an honest. I was honestly confused, and it wasn't intentional, obviously, because I hate it. Would if I had noticed it, there's no way I would have attempted to pull it off over on anyone, because I would know, oh, that's going to get caught easily. This is too central a point here for you to get wrong. Just like it's a similar thing to the 360 degrees for a triangle mistake I made in that video as well. Except with the Jordan Peterson one, it's much more serious, because fundamentally, by attributing to him an argument he did not make, I am defaming him. And so I am going to take down the videos I put up about him, but I'm not going to take them down until after I put up my correction video and leave them up for a little while in case anybody wants to reference what I'm talking about. And then I'll take them down later tomorrow. And then I'll replace the later one with another one. So the problem here is the one thing I can never be, no matter what, is hypocritical. Otherwise, I lose all of my credibility immediately. I put too much weight on my credibility and my intellectual honesty to permit this egregious mistake on my part to be spun by me, to permit myself to spin this egregious mistake, which is the first thing that I tried to do. My first response to it was, what? Okay, so I cherry-picked that one warrant. What's the big deal? Come on, I'm trying to make a point here. And then they made clear, no, you didn't cherry-pick that one warrant. That's not what he said. He said something very different. And I thought, did he? I'm pretty sure he said that. And as I've thought about it since, I realized that I must have gotten some shit jumbled up in my head because of the way that I approached this. As I said before, the reason I was watching Jordan Peterson videos at all was not to respond to them argumentationally. I was just writing down Jordan Petersonisms so I could make jokes about, do a good imitation of him. And then I freestyled for a while with that doll, Jordan Peterson saying various things. Okay. The thing is, on the screen, it looks a lot like Jordan Peterson. And so it's kind of like I got something I said pretending to be Jordan Peterson jumbled up with stuff he said, and thought that I was telling the truth about what he said, but I was really just referring to me making fun of him. So that's a big problem, and I gotta fix that shit. It was Horse Mumbler, and it was the real Klaus, whatever his name is, two people in particular. I'm gonna name them tomorrow when I make this video. I'm glad I'm addressing it now as well in case they watch this, but and I appreciate them being so, hammering. I appreciate their hammering to make sure that it was clear to me that no, what I had done was not be kind of sloppy. What I had done was directly, explicitly misrepresent what he said. What I attributed to him, he did not say. That was Eric who said that. So, and that deserves to be hammered until it's clear that Eric does not get to squirm out from underneath this. It needs to be explicitly stated that that is what happened, and it needs to be corrected officially on the record, because anything else is just me not setting the example I need to set, and not upholding my own values, and not living up to what I say, and just being a scumbag. So I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not being a bit rough on myself. Because the reason I'm not being a bit rough on myself is I don't make that kind of mistake. And I'm a debate coach. And that was... I mean, that's like that's like a receiver dropping a game-winning touchdown pass that's right in his hands, you know. It's just, as a professional, whatever you are, you have to hold yourself accountable by being like, you performed unacceptably poorly there, and you don't really get to have any excuses because you're a professional, and that's okay, you know. The nice thing is, I'm quite confident something like this is much less likely to happen again because of this incident, you know. So, and that's what I always try to do. My friend Dave Porter, who was an ISFJ, told me when I was a little kid that when I was sort of beating myself up about something, to chalk it up to experience. And I took to the expression. I liked it, and I've used it ever since to help me feel better when I fuck up. Yes, Jordan Valley, tonight you get to have an offer that no sane person would ever refuse, which is this. If you are being chased by a wild animal, and you should happen to encounter me on the street, and you ask permission to hide in my mouth, I will give you permission to hide in my mouth. No, there are a few stipulations. You cannot harm me in any way as part of the process of getting into my mouth. And the whole of you has to hide in my mouth. You can't just hide a part of you in my mouth. So you'll probably have to be a very small person to take advantage of this offer, but I do extend this offer to you, should those conditions be met, that you're being chased by a wild animal, and the wild animal chases you to wherever I am. And the wild animal, I should also add, has to be bigger than a squirrel or a cat or something like that. It has to be at least large dog-sized. I don't want someone coming up to me, I'm being chased by a butterfly, or can I hide in your mouth? No, you're not under any real danger there. I'm mostly just interested in saving lives. Eric, what do you want to do really in life? I want to save lives. I want to constantly save lives. Do you know how many unsaved lives go unsaved every day from a lack of saving? Countless. No, you know what, Ring? You know what? You've got a good point there. Okay, so I'm going to say that rule only applies to people who can realistically take advantage of the offer. I mean, to people who can't realistically take advantage of the offer. If you can realistically take advantage of the offer, then, and you're being chased by a squirrel, fine. You can hide in my mouth. You know, it's like, when you make an offer like this, you feel pretty confident that probably there aren't going to be any instances where all the various stipulations are met such that you actually have to fulfill your promise. But I can just imagine, like, 12 years from now, this little tiny guy comes starting up to me and is like, hey, it's me. Who are you? It's me, Midlight Gods. Oh, hey, you're so small. I need to hide in your mouth. You promised. Okay. You want to hide in my pocket instead? No. You promised your mouth. I want in there. Oh, you're using the word save correctly, Oliver. What's wrong with you using the word save correctly? If I were really saving lives, I'd be accumulating them over time, right? So, where is the big pile of all those lives that people saved by staying home, anyway? If that's 4 inches 7 centimeters, then you can probably fit into my mouth. Or 4 inches and 7/16 to be fully non-metric. I am fully non-metric. You're convinced that the British and Canadians spell savior and behavior correctly, but not color? That's very interesting, Oliver Linehan. I am convinced that the word judgment is spelled with an E. That's not... Aliana Diaz, you're not supposed to call them midgets anymore. You're supposed to call them Eskimos. God, have a little respect. Judgment. Don't you think there should be an E in there? Judgement. When did it lose the... When did it lose the E? When did they decide it didn't need an E anymore? Nobody notified me of this change. I'm quite certain this is a Mandela effect is what it is. No way. Is that true? If you're 4'10", you're legally a midget? Well, so you should get papers that say you're a midget, been like gods. That was certified midget. But most importantly, remember, the word now is Eskimo. Then maybe you can use that disadvantaged status to argue that you deserve to be your own Indian tribe. Maybe get the federal government to give you a reservation and you can start a casino, sell some fireworks. So he can get places, duh, Eliana. Is there something wrong with your legs? How are you supposed to get places if you can't roll around? Boy, Eliana, that one seemed pretty obvious to me. Have you never realized why there are wheels on those chairs? It's so that you can roll them around. It reminds me of my high school, it reminds me of my senior college thesis science project, which was entitled, "Do Wheels Make Things Roll?" This is offensive. We call them the shrunken ones. You know, what I'm thinking, though, is that Men Like Gods needs to basically trade up his disability status into a Native American, where you really get shit. That's the only thing that you really get shit for. If you're your own tribe, you're just one guy in your own tribe, you still need a whole reservation for yourself. Just give me those, 100 square miles right there is fine. I'll set up my teepee right in the middle. I'll let you know when I get a squaw. We'll continue filling out the registry of people in the tribe as we make more of them. Oh no, don't worry. We'll keep up the shtick. Oh no, yeah, rain dances, teepees, feathers, oi 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 oi, the whole 9 yards. We promise. I already picked out my Indian name. I'm called Rolling Chair. What do you think? Pretty good joke, huh? Pretty good joke by Eric. Eric, are you making jokes at the expense of the disabled? No. I'm making jokes with the hilarity of that thing. Yeah, my Indian name is Baby Pig Poop Face, but it's also my real name. It's also the best description of me. How would you describe Eric? Kind of a baby and a pig and a poop face combined? You know, I just met him and you were so right on the money. That is exactly what he is. He's a baby and a pig and a poop face combined. Yeah, that's why his parents named him Baby Pig Poop Face, actually. They did. You could tell we're even that soon, right at birth, huh? No, they waited till he was 16 to name him. Trouble, what do you think you're doing, mister? Oh no. You are not allowed in here, little mister. You're gonna run away. It's okay. I'm not doing anything. Let's see if Trouble is gonna come to the door again. Stick his nose in. Look, Oliver, all things are measured against the standard of big American males, alright? Just deal with it. Just deal with it. Take your IQ score. Get your job in a cubicle and just smile and take it, okay? Just find out your IQ scores are going to slot you into your career. Oops, looks like you're going to be a clerk for the rest of your life. What kind of clerk? The kind of clerk that can be stupid. That's the kind of clerk. Just deal with it. New t-shirt idea. Just deal with it. That's really a new idea. Deal with it. I'd rather it's say how about if you just rearrange the words? How about this? It deal just with. That's a good shirt, right? Because then when people decode it and they're mad that they had to decode it, it says just deal with it. My IQ is the same as my height, 64. Just deal it with just. Deal it with just. Yeah, that would be a good shirt, right? Deal it with just. IQ helps nothing? Which quantifies what exactly? Are you kidding me, New Groove? Your IQ score is the most important piece of property you own, okay? It's the new status of white man. Because, back in the day, the Supreme Court established that the status of being a white man was part of your property. If you were a white man. At which point, Congress then had to define who qualified as a white person. And boy, I tell ya, that is a tricky business. That is tricky. Like, am I? If you get really too German, are you kind of swarthy and not really a white person anymore? I think that might be the case. Happened 2 years ago when you were 35. I'm sorry to hear that. Whatever's wrong with you. I didn't see that part, so I'm not sure what I'm sorry about, but there you go. Okay. If you ask someone your stereotypical SI question and they point out that their memory of events is terrible, can we rule out that SI is not their blind spot? Can we? No, I mean, you never want to rule anything out on self reporting. Just because whatever somebody like, okay, an SI Dom, literally, an ISTJ is actually susceptible to potentially saying something like, I have a bad memory and I'm messy. Because for them, they're remembering that time 3 weeks ago when they forgot that one thing. And being like, yeah, I don't have really that good of a memory, actually. Because it's like when my dad says, man, I'm slipping. He'll say, man, I'm slipping, when he's rattling off all these details about this battle from 1834, and he can't remember one of the generals' names. That's not slipping. You did way better than I could have done as far as remembering details. So it's they don't self-report well, and that's also especially true when you've got NI 8 or 7, because they don't recognize their own shit against an external standard, but against their own internal understanding of what the ideal would be. When an ISTJ is thinking about themselves in the background, this song is playing. One on one, I'm gonna play that game tonight. Me and my experience. One on one, I only know what I need to know. Where's everyone tuning in from today? Well, let me just tell you first to help you answer that question, Jordan Valley, that we are currently broadcasting in over 31 countries and on the Armed Forces Radio Network. Oh, wait, no, we're not doing that. We're on the internet. My mistake. We're on ham radio. This is a ham radio program. I wish I could have Talking with Famous People broadcast only on ham radio. I love Hall & Oates too. But their lyrics are terrible. But their songs are good. It is very expensive gas around here. But, I don't drive that much, I guess, is what it boils down to. I just don't drive that much. I do wish that, in addition, every time I was on YouTube, I wish I had an AM radio station somewhere, maybe in like Chicago, okay? And I want to have an FM radio station somewhere, maybe a Sirius satellite radio station somewhere, and also I want to have a channel like Scientology has a channel, I put that branch because you wanted to put a link there and it didn't go, so you can put it if you want. Now I want that vintage old school AM radio mono sound. How does polar TI manifest in weekly life? Well, So let me answer that question about TI polar with referencing an example of something. Okay. That ESFP British lady, who I kind of had some laughs at her expense in the way that she had self-reported being so badass about the TI questions, and then when I actually asked her, she was she couldn't have been worse on them, you know. So, what is my point? My point is, she emailed me today with her emailing finger. Where is her email? Let me look in the sent part. Okay. So she says this. Hi, Eric. Spoke with Eansby. Mid-conversation, I asked him, who would your uncle's wife's mother's daughter's son be in relation to you? And he got it right. And ISFJ, I asked, got it wrong. She couldn't figure it out. She has TI too, though. I know it's... You want to share any thoughts on the subject as to why that would be? And it was basically the gist of what she said there. And then I responded, the reason ISFJ third slot TI didn't get it, is, if that is the exact question you asked, is because it's a hard one. It's because you start with uncle's wife's mother, but don't clarify whether the uncle or the aunt is a blood relative. It's not relevant information. You don't need to know to answer the question, but it makes the answerer hold two possible frames on the issue until the end when they determine that the information wasn't relevant. At that point, you realize you never needed to account for the question of whether the aunt or the uncle was the blood relative, but having to account for it took up the processing power nevertheless, and ultimately ended up overwhelming the ISFJ's attentional strength in that area, you know? And she said, she says in response, actually, I figured I did it on purpose, irrelevant as you say, but enough to cause a little chaos. I did not want it easier for the ENTP as he is brilliant for real. Cheers for responding. But the thing is, if she really asked exactly this question, who is your uncle's wife's mother's daughter's son? Then the answer is your cousin's kid. And I'm skeptical if that's what she meant to do exactly, right? Like, normally you'll try to have an answer to a question that may be kind of a obscure relative, but at least one that there's a name for. I don't know what the name for her cousin's kid is, and it seems unlikely that she constructed a problem to which the answer is a cousin's kid, your cousin's kid. But she may have thought it something else. One of the guys who answered it may have gave her the answer she thought it was, and now she thinks he's got it right. And the way I just responded right there, I didn't clarify the cousin's kid part, because, in fact, I didn't mention the answer in it, because then I would have gotten into too big of a can of worms there in answering the email. So I answered the email the way I did, assuming that, basically operating under the assumption that she had, in fact, gotten the question right, like it constructed a question, knew what the answer to it herself was, and was correct about that. But I am very skeptical of that. Oliver Linehan says, I've noted that you actually perform better on the SI test than I do, at least initially. I can't actually access my events linearly from anything earlier than today. I can reconstruct it, though. Well, the thing is, Oliver, what that would be suggestive of to me is that, I'm not... We'd be better off saying, rather than saying SI in the fourth slot for me, we'd be better off saying, being an extroverted intuitor, means using introverted sensing as a knowledge function and also treating it more as an action function, consistent with extroverted intuition's goals and needs and wants. So for me, the capacity to recount details and remember. I was having an interesting conversation with Rachel in the car today, and I think it might be kind of philosophically insightful. I'm sorry I'm getting all tangential here and rambly on this answer, but so we retain all this information of things that have happened before. People who are SI or people who are NI, even SI polar people are going to retain some of this stuff, right? For example, I remember how my house looked before the remodel. Now, retaining that information, this is one of those evolutionary psychology things. There's no reason to retain that information. Not only is it about the past, but I know and can be certain that I'll never need that information again. It will never be useful to me to know where the bathroom is in the whole old house arrangement because it's no longer there, right? And that house arrangement will never be reconstructed. The only possible use I could have for retaining that information is if I wanted to try to recreate it, right? But since it's the new thing is in the same place as the old thing, I'd have to tear down the new thing to recreate it. And, in other words, there's no meaningful reason to remember the layout of my grandmother's house from my childhood. Maybe your house is long since burned down, been a new house, new owners, whatever, but you still remember the layout of your childhood home. Well, the thing about that is it links strongly to identity. So why is it then that anybody would retain useless information that is determinedly useless? In other words, it was relevant in the past, but is definitively not relevant to anything now and never will be again, you can establish with a very high degree of certainty. And the answer is because it's your identity. And we can see this in narratives and fiction and stuff. Like, let's say I'm actually a clone of them who turns out to be the main character. I'm the fake one. But they've implanted in me all these false memories to make me believe that I'm that guy. In that conceit, that literary conceit, is a demonstration of how people don't have in place a frame to express concepts about identity and will conflate, depending on their own frame, memories with identity. Because memories serve no other purpose, especially, when plenty of our memories serve no other purpose. Not all of them serve no other purpose, but plenty of them do. And so, if we were going to say, well, what are those? Why are those there? What are those? Well, that's the blood and guts of identity. That's some of the blood and guts of identity. The thing is, one can have an identity and be a being or an agent moving through time, but attend much less to their own identity or attend much more to their own identity. When in a friendly debate, what do you do when someone isn't telling the whole story? Well, that happened to me today where I got called out on straw manning. So what those people did was call me out on it and establish their points with a high degree of effectiveness and clarity and win the argument. No, it is a BS tactic, and that's why they won the argument. And when they called me on it, I can't be hypocritical, so I need to make a retraction video, etc. Blah 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 blah. I've gone over this right before you got in here. I've gone over this a couple times already, Spencer Jones. So I don't really want to get into the story again. But what do I do when somebody else isn't doing it? I mean, I need more specific context than that, right? Like, the way I experience it is much simpler than that. The way I experience things is people are not answering my questions, or they're pretending as though the words I said didn't get said. When those things happen, that's when I get very frustrated, because they're not affording me the same courtesy I'm affording them, namely the presumption that their words mean something and matter in some way. So the problem for me is not normally that they're not telling the whole truth. It's that I don't care if they're telling the whole truth, because as long as they're answering my questions, then I will get the whole truth. As long as they're not avoiding my questions and answering what I actually ask and not answering some other question, or trying to change the subject, I will get as much of the truth as I need and want, and that's fine. They don't have to volunteer it to me. They can require me to do the work of dragging it out of them one bit at a time with a bunch of questions. It's fine. Host Eric, have you heard of profilicity? Basically, it is about how people export their personal identities onto their social media profiles, becoming defined by their online persona. Well, I mean, what the claim is making is that the person is changed into the person they claim to be. My guess is whoever came up with this idea is probably an ENTP. It's sort of true for ENTPs if you're only looking at surface stuff. As I said the other day, and as I could link to again here, or if somebody else could get the link as a mod and put it, would be great, is if you look at a video of me at 17 years old, you can see that I'm definitely an ENTP, the same guy, right? But I can tell you now that I'm a much more moral, upstanding, caring, rounded ENTP in my surface aspects than I was then. So you could say that YouTube has made me into a better person, for sure. But it hasn't made me into a different person. And Horse Mumbler, listen, in case you don't start hitting on me yet, okay? Because as I articulated earlier in the stream, if you just got here, I've articulated a bunch of stuff about the subject, and I'm going to make a video about it tomorrow in which I retract my claim. I acknowledge I made a mistake about Jordan Peterson, that I misattributed something to him, and explain why it happened. But I don't want to go over it again, because I've already gone over it a couple times. Well, but Horse Mumbler, the question is, obviously there's not any good evolutionary reason to retain information specifically that is not relevant anymore and that won't be relevant again, such as how this house used to look before the remodel. So there's no advantage to that, right? It's just, in other words, it links only to my identity. Because I'm me, part of me is built on these foundational spatial impressions that I made, No, that wasn't as I made it, though. I specifically said information that's not useful anymore and won't become useful again. So that wasn't how I said it. I was very clear about that. Well, he successfully busted my chops earlier, but he's not going to successfully bust my chops on this one, because this is cut and dry. You may have gotten here a second late, but I definitely said that. Because the new house is built on the same place as the old house. So, in order for it to be useful again, it would only be via my choice as an identity expression to recreate it. It wouldn't have any independent utility. So it would still collapse down to an identity thing, not an advantage. In other words, you can't have an advantage that me getting what feels nostalgically gratifying to me is not an evolutionary advantage. Maybe an advantage to me, but nobody could position it as an evolutionary advantage. But as I indicated, if you are a little bit steamy about my earlier, initially sort of dismissive response to your objection, go back and watch earlier in the stream where I go over it in some extent, and you'll see that I recognize the error of my ways here. As in, the person who takes the psychotropics foretells the future and resolves conflict within the tribes using magical means. I can see in the chat IQ was brought up earlier, which is interesting to me. Can anyone give you a quick synopsis? Well, the initial inclusion of IQ in this stream was me basically making jokes about it. And then some other people took a more serious approach, saying that basically, they don't like it because it's not measuring something really very specific, and I think the follow-up to it is, regardless of whether it's correlatively strong with certain in linking to certain outcomes or certain jobs or whatever, regardless of that, it's one of those things that only works the wrong direction. You might be able to say stuff about people in general, but anytime you try to use it to inform anything about anybody in particular, you're committing some kind of ontological assault. Well, no, it really doesn't mean anything. It depends what you value, Spencer Jones. That's the thing. My IQ is not unusually high. And purportedly, Jordan Peterson's IQ is very, very high. But I'm definitely more correct than he is. I definitely understand the world and reality better than he does, because I have the correct metaframe, and because I come from a background of argumentational vigor, not vigor theater, which is what empirics is often, not always, but often. Well, because Horse Mumbler, we already know that not all information is retained. So, there must be some criterion by which retention is determined, right? Or, maybe not willfully, but, definitely not willfully, but it is the case that, put it this way, since plenty of memories are lost, then what we can ascertain is that what we retain doesn't link very strongly to what we might need in the future. I have a much stronger retention of stuff from childhood than of more recent stuff, even though it makes sense that I would use more recent stuff more for my future self. I'm much more needed to remember all the specifics of those various Jordan Peterson videos and not get them confused with some thing I was making or whatever. Then I need to remember the lyrics to a song that I haven't heard in 30 years. So, in other words, what we can conclude is that the way that SI prioritizes a couple of different things, namely, the long-term impressions are strongest when they're made earliest, and that the the retention of memories links at best loosely per memory to that memory's utility. So we can pretty well conclude that the way that humans engage with their memories was not arrived at by advantageousness, right? If it had been prioritized by advantageousness, then there'd be a forgetting thing that correlated with current utility rather than previous familiarity. Because the way SI works, there's a familiarity bias, there's a recency bias, sure, but there's a familiarity bias that's more ontological. In other words, that which you were deeply familiar with when you were little sticks with you forever, and it starts to fade. That process seems to start to fade around 20 years old or so. You know, your memories get a little more vague about things for stretches of time, even though they're more recent. So the bias in terms of recency is a knowledge bias rather than a what you retain bias. Okay, but if you're gonna say that though, horse mumbler, then you're gonna say that in every instance, anything that can be framed as an advantage some of the time can be framed as advantageous on balance. So you're not really engaging the issue here in a very nuanced way, I don't think. I mean, obviously, we can imagine a scenario where every aspect of a human being can be framed as advantageous in some specific context. So I can imagine how my weak stomach is advantageous. Well, if I'm in part of a tribe where I'm eating lots of iffy food, my weak stomach means I'm going to get less seriously poisoned because I'm going to puke it up sooner. Does that mean having a weak stomach is an evolutionary advantage? No. No, you're not going to say what? I didn't tell you to say anything, did I? I'm pretty sure I didn't tell you to say anything. But correct me if I'm wrong. Can an FE inferior user ever develop to the point where it's better than an FE dom? Doesn't make the question is a category error. FE is not better or worse. So in the scenario I described with the tree, my FE was better, quote unquote, than Rachel's. The reason being, well, it was better than Rachel's second answer, okay? Her first answer is she's just not going to say anything. In that regard, she takes no FE risks. But she also, no risks, no gambles, no winnings, right? So, in my approach, I've been very friendly with the neighbor. I may get what I want, the tree limb not to fall down, and the neighbor's not going to be offended by my presumptuousness. But does that mean I have better FE? No, it means that I have less FI because I know I'm not going to follow up if he doesn't get the hint. I'm not going to be direct about it. When when not doing anything wasn't a good enough answer for Rachel, her follow-up was to address it directly in some fashion. Have you noticed that this one is yeah. Look, Jordan Peterson is clearly very smart. My point about him in general is he's a tragic figure because he's struggling under the weight of having embraced a fundamentally wrong frame of reference. Okay, Horse Mumbler, what words did I put in your mouth? I asked you to correct me if I was wrong. You've not done that. You've just proceeded as though I was wrong and that I put words in your mouth. What words did I put in your mouth? You need to state those words before I accept that I actually did that. So you've not established your point at all. Don't act as though you have. Until you tell me which words I put in your mouth. Because as far as I can recall, you said, I told you to say something. Or you said, you implied I told you to say something. You said, I'm not going to say those words. So I'm asking you, well, what words did I tell you to say? You said, I'm not going to say that, and you're wrong to assume as much. What did I say you were going to say? State that before claiming your prize of indignation. Okay? You haven't earned your indignation yet. You haven't done the work. What did I do? You're claiming that, but you have not articulated it. No, I did read you correctly, fucktard. Quote, no, I'm not going to say that, and you are wrong to assume as much. Please stop that. That's what you said. Your habit of putting words in people's mouth is really quite dishonorable. Seriously, it's not something I will tolerate in a friend. Never do it again with me. You said that immediately thereafter, even though in between those, I made clear to you that I needed you to articulate what it was, my words were, that you're finding offensive here. You failed to articulate those. So you don't get to be indignant yet. After you articulate them, then you get to be indignant. Just like I had to be humbled when you called me out correctly because you articulated the good reasons why, right? Not because you just felt indignant. It doesn't work like that. Assuming you know what I will say next is absolutely unacceptable, and I have said so many times. You are wrong to have even tried. What they are matters not a whit. I mean, the thing is, Horse Mumbler, I'm not in agreement with you that I assumed what you were going to say and said, this is what you're going to say next. I may have done so, but again, I have asked you on multiple occasions to please say what those words were that I said, and you've failed to do so. Okay, what did I say? I knew you. What did I say? Did I say, I know what you're going to say next? Did I say that? Were those my words? Is that what you're saying? I mean, why don't you answer my fucking question? Why don't you say what I said exactly? Is that what I said? It's like you're jumping way ahead here, dude. You've got to do the steps. Just like I had to get called out because I didn't do the steps. I didn't do a good job. I was sloppy with that video. You need to do the steps too. Okay, thank you. So now you've answered the question. Right? I said, I know what you're going to say next. You are right that I don't actually know what you're going to say next. I predict what you're going to say next. And next time I will say that. I do get to predict what you're going to say next. I don't get to build arguments, assuming I'm right about that, but I do get to predict what you say next. And that's okay. And that's something you're going to have to live with. It is correct that I didn't know, and that my claiming to have known was false. But you can understand why I was confused, because your first words, which you claimed I misread, were, no, I'm not going to say that. So I naturally thought, I must have told you to say something. A reasonable conclusion to draw. I understand now that you were referring to something specific that I said you were going to say, or that I knew you were going to say. But you can understand my confusion, and it didn't stem from me not reading you right, did it? I read every word correctly. So, I know you're prickly, but you're prickly about that earlier thing. And you need to, as I said, stop watching right now, go back and review the earlier part of the live stream where I addressed it in full. Or try to gain a little bit of consciousness about FI, although I know that's fundamentally impossible for 8 slot. You're being driven by it right now. And I get it, but it's about the earlier thing, which I've already addressed and in full, and I took a full accounting for. So go get your satisfaction from that. Don't try to create some new thing now. Okay, so I misunderstood that, but you can see how my interpretation was reasonable, at least, right? That is not exactly a misinterpretation. It's just I interpreted it wrong, but it was a reasonable interpretation to make, right? Okay, good. Let me try to flush the F from me. It's like poo. Like horrible, stinky poo. So I need to keep matches by me at all times so I can light one in case I have feelings. Here, that's a good idea, Spencer Jones. You go ahead and try not to grow up. This is exactly why I try to get ahead of shit, because I knew if I didn't get ahead of this thing about Jordan Peterson, that I was going to have a shit show on my hands. And unfortunately, despite my efforts to get ahead of it by at least talking about it in this live stream, even though I didn't make the video yet, I didn't quite get ahead of it enough because Horse Mumbler wasn't there when I did that. So there's that other guy too that I need to make sure he sees either this or the video I'm going to make before I hear from him, because I don't want to hear his shit. What do I smoke? What do you got? Cigarettes, weed, meth, crack. You got it, I'll smoke it. I'll crush up an Adderall and smoke that, I don't care. Meritocracy is not a myth. The problem with Jordan Peterson is not that he doesn't seek truth. He does seek truth. He's trying very hard to be a good man who's on the right side of things. The problem isn't that he's a bad person or ill-intentioned. It's that he doesn't understand. He's doing a yeoman's job of flailing around without the right frame of reference. He doesn't have a cognitive frame. In other words, this is the fundamental problem with Jordan Peterson. And it's the same problem that everybody else has, basically, too, okay? So it's not unique to him. Jordan Peterson never begins anything that he's talking about or thinking about or lecture notes he's planning or whatever by asking the question, why am I, Jordan Peterson, making this lecture in this way? Why am I, Jordan Peterson, presenting these ideas in the way that I am? And to the extent that he does ask those questions, he answers the question because I'm right. Not, or because it's good for society. Not with the correct answer, which is because I'm projecting my function biases. And because he doesn't begin with that question and answer that question, he can never get outside the box to actually understand things. He's always flailing around inside the box. No matter how smart he is, I have an insurmountable advantage in being right, because I can actually evaluate things through an objective framework which begins with being objective about yourself. That I'm not special. I too am just projecting my frame biases. And then you get to say this. All right, well, if I'm just projecting my frame biases, then is everything all equal? No, because reality presents us with various contexts that are maximally appropriate for various frame biases. And if you're expressing your frame biases in the right context, then they can be totally validated to the exclusion of other frame biases, because it's the context that determines that, not anything else. Well, I do think Jordan Peterson is smart. I think by and large, he's a pretty careful arguer. And by and large, he's trying to not be wrong, but he's hooked his wagon to the wrong horse is what's happened, and so we have this ongoing kind of tragedy before our eyes. Somebody who's potentially a real leader, and whose ignorance, for lack of a better word, has rendered him into somebody who's struggling to find his identity in a way that's not contributing to the problem, but rather is helping it. Because I think he understands that divisiveness and such is a problem, but to the extent that he continues to frame it as a problem caused by relativism and by those who wish to have, and by identity politics, he's, first of all, way overweighting the importance of the negative consequences of those things. Sure, there are extreme examples where, in fact, the net impact is harmful from those, but by and large, the strength of those arguments to move people is doing as one could easily have predicted it would do, which is it's becoming scattered, muddled. You've got situations where various identity politics groups end up being pitted against each other, and then there's this sort of battle for who best enjoys the status of disenfranchised or something, and it becomes a mess. So it's actually those narratives that he rails against are not powerful narratives, and he's putting the cart before the horse there. He's saying these narratives I'm railing against are responsible for these various decays of Western civilization. In reality, it's a much simpler answer than that. The world has changed dramatically because of the internet. What used to be really clear-cut is now muddied, substantially, for a lot of different reasons, but they all link to the internet. So that's what it looks like if you answer a question correctly as to what's going on with the transition from traditional post-Enlightenment Western values of individualism into this more communitarian kind of framework, into this place where people's feelings and identities and fragility is respected so much. Oh, horrible news, But the reality is a lot simpler than that. It's the internet. It's made us all more tolerant. It's made us all more thoughtful in one way or another. Now, granted, groupism is worse than it's ever been in metaphysical land, but not in physical land. So, while in metaphysical land, people are in rabid conflict with each other over things and screaming fights like the one I had with Michael the other day, in reality, in society, people compartmentalize. When we go out in the world, I never see anybody screaming at each other about anything. So this is reality. It's not the postmodernists, that are to blame. It's not identity politics that are to blame. It's not any of those specific things, transgenderism. It's the adolescence of humanity via the introduction and initial period of time of the completed metaphysical ecosystem, the internet. And once information fluidity became actualized by the internet, our understandings of various paradigms became much more complicated. So, when we want to be correct and not metaphorical, we answer questions like that instead of like he answers them. It's like the questions I've been asking people lately, the TE questions that I'm just sort of asked for fun. I'm not sure what it's testing exactly, and I'm not sure what to make of the answers anyway. I'm not sure how to interpret the answers, but you ask a question. Well, solve California's drought problem. How do you solve it? And people give me all kinds of crazy answers, but you could just say have people should build cisterns to save rainwater. You could just say more desalination plants. In other words, people try to solve the problem from this big sort of frame way, like, well, we need to make sure that more rain fell on California. Somebody told me, solve it. Well, we need to somehow make the clouds go over California more and make them rain more, I guess. Okay, well, that's not a solution, right? That's just wishing things were different. When I ask about plastic in the oceans, people give me all these complicated answers about dropping microbes in the oceans that eat plastic, about plastic magnets, that they need to invent some sort of plastic magnet to attract all the plastic to it. When the answer is very simple. You scoop it out of the water from the side of a boat. Now, they're not going to get rid of all of the plastic in the ocean, but what I'm saying is when you're localized in your attention to the issue, in other words, when your job is narrowly defined enough, get some plastic out of the ocean, you naturally say, okay, well, give me a net or something, I'll scoop some out. But when it's asked in this abstract fashion, people don't engage with it in the same way. And such is true about public discourse as a whole. What Jordan Peterson is seeing as predominant in society is predominant in the parts of the metaphysical ecosystem that he habitually visits. And it's predominant there as media objects and stuff. But when he walks around the world, he's not encountering it. Now, he had this experience with his university where they chose to go extra crazy with the pronoun shit. And for him, this is a horseman of the apocalypse coming to say all of the values and principles of the Western society that I cherish and that allow us to be free, healthy, happy people are falling to the wayside, are being slain by these fragility advocates. Of course, as SI polar, SI is an absolute value, but also a blind spot. So one good example is going to carry a lot of weight. And then the rest of the time, he's living in inland where he can identify all these horrible narratives and instances of those narratives playing out in the real world in bad ways, where he can talk a lot about narratives about animal populations and stuff and show how that and say that tells us something about humans because we evolved from the same stock. But in reality, of course, this is another of the ongoing set of waves that comes in across the debate shore. Identity politics are faded from debate rounds now because they had their day, they won their rounds, and then people figured out how to counter them because they're weak arguments. They don't withstand scrutiny in a well-judged round. So people don't really run it anymore. The regular world trails about 10 years behind the debate world in terms of its argumentation. So 10 years before anybody started seriously arguing for marijuana legalization, it was a moot point in debate. They wouldn't even bother putting that topic because it skewed so heavy in favor of legalization that it was almost impossible to argue the neg. So that is the laboratory for public discourse, where we understand what the arguments of tomorrow are going to be among the general public. I'm anticipating that that's falling apart to some extent because, again, the internet. So while it's been true, I'm not sure it will continue to be true because I'm not sure what the impact of the internet on that, whatever mechanism that was, will be. I think the mechanism wasn't really a mechanism. I think it was just a correlation that, or just a reality that people who are actively working on figuring out what's correct the most are going to be ahead of schedule in terms of having that information, you know. I'm a Christian. I'd never lose any argument to an atheist at all. In fact, I win them all. I win the arguments against agnostics as well. You like to hear me win them? You guys who are identifying as atheist or agnostic have made a mistake. It's like identifying yourself as an anti-Brussels sprouts person. You don't like to eat Brussels sprouts. That's not an advocacy, and we shouldn't frame it as one. So, it's not a philosophical position either. You don't like to eat Brussels sprouts. It doesn't mean Brussels sprouts are bad. And it doesn't mean Brussels sprouts are good. And it doesn't mean people should eat Brussels sprouts, and it doesn't mean people shouldn't eat Brussels sprouts. And it's not the sort of thing about which one makes affirmations and negations. One eats them if one wishes, and one doesn't if one does not. So, faith is like eating Brussels sprouts. It's a behavior that one engages in sometimes. It does not come with a corresponding set of affirmations that one must make. In fact, one doesn't have to affirm anything, any statements at all, in order to pray and exercise faith as a behavior. The problem that people who want to debate God make is they misconstrue the behavior of faith as the sort of thing about which one makes arguments. No, okay, eating Brussels sprouts. So prayer is not imaginary either. You may claim that the thing I'm praying to is imaginary, but I am not imagining that I am praying. Men like gods, Jordan Valley, Spencer Jones, if I were to sit here and pray out loud, you would all agree that I have prayed. There's no disputing that, right? And as somebody who was praying seriously and not making a joke of it, you would be able to conclude that I must be, and since I'm praying to Jesus, I must be a Christian, and you'd be right. And what else do you think you could conclude from that? What else do you think you could conclude? Men like gods, do you think you could conclude that, therefore, I affirm the statement God exists? Okay, well, see, that's the thing. People like you think that if somebody prays, that means they affirm the status, the statement, God exists. But I exercise faith and use prayer and recognize that statements are irrelevant to it. It's like, I don't need to affirm the statement, I like Brussels sprouts before I eat them. I don't need to justify my decision, right? And to think that I do need to justify it is to treat eating Brussels sprouts as though it were a political advocacy. Political advocacies need to be justified. Cosmological arguments need to be justified. But my Christianity doesn't express as a cosmological argument. I'm not explaining anything with Christianity. Well, it's the just that's the problem there, Spencer Jones. So, a fully realized stage of development, is a meta-rationalist stage of development, one way or the other. Either you start with non-rationalism and you grow to incorporate it, or you start with rationalism and you grow to recognize its limitations. What we know for sure is this. We can be objective about negative morality without invoking any kind of magical thinking stuff. We don't need any God to determine objectively that which is morally prohibited. Okay, we can create a system of ethics that's wholly rights-based and that sidesteps any need for any kind of justification externally besides internal consistency and the initial concession that slavery is not morally acceptable. We have to begin with that initial conception. And once we begin with that, the rest of negative morality can be deduced, okay? And we don't have to justify why slavery is not morally acceptable. We just have to come to consensus that we're going to agree that that's axiomatic, okay? So in that regard, that's perfectly fine. But it's equally so that we cannot use logic, reason, intuition, etc. to know with clarity that which is morally indicated as a positive action. And if we want to be informed on that issue, the only way to be informed on it is via magical thinking. So a fully robust thinker has a magical thinking frame in which they can address those kinds of cosmological questions that defy reason, matters of the ineffable, matters of, for example, one's own purpose and destiny. Now you might say, well, there's no reason to conclude you have a purpose or destiny. But you do have a choice as to whether to frame your life as though you do or not. And because it's not rationally justified, it means if you're going to justify choosing the latter over the former, then you're going to need to use a magical thinking frame. If you're going to justify not, well, that's not a good thing. Right, yes. Anybody who's trying to define God or make arguments to explain why God exists or something is being just as wrong as you are, right? You're trying to say that because definitions of God are different, that you have some point to make about faith. But of course, faith definitionally is belief or behaving as though one believes in something in the absence of evidence or in the face of contrary evidence. If, in fact, God were rationally establishable, he wouldn't be God. No, but see, Spencer Jones, I already explained this, and it seems to me, I don't know if you're being purposefully obtuse now or what. I just explained this. You can only justify negative morality logically. You can't justify positive moral indications, and yet we do encounter positive moral indication questions in the world, and we sometimes reach moral conundrums about those. So I just explained why. So whatever else you do, okay, again, Spencer Jones, I don't pray to the Bible. So why is that relevant to anything? I'm not saying that because I'm a Christian, I affirm any statements that you're making about Christianity, because that's a category. Are you not getting this? Here's something I've encountered before. Atheists and agnostics who encounter my argumentation chain tend to argue against other arguments they've heard before because they've never heard this one before, and they're assuming because I'm a Christian I must be gonna make these arguments. And it's fine for you to assume that, but once I've clarified that I'm not gonna make these arguments, then at that point respond to the arguments that I'm actually making. I mean, it doesn't really matter so much where things come from, okay? If you're saying values come from God, you've got your words backwards. You choose to engage in a behavior of faith that informs you meaningfully about values, is the best way to say that. Then you're argumentationally safe. And you're correct. You're describing something that's correct at that point. When we focus on that kind of agent, subject, object language, I engage in a behavior of faith that informs me regarding morality. I mean, yeah, the whole point is there aren't very many things. There are a few things, but not very many things about which we argue whether or not they exist. It's a strange thing to argue about because it's a named thing and you're arguing about whether it exists, right? We do it maybe about Sasquatches. We say like, I know, and Heartbreak Kid 5231, I'm on your side with the Christianity thing. But I also know that you're the kind of Christian atheists like to debate. Because you're expressing your honest, good-willed resonance with the divine as a good to be upheld, but no matter how you put it, you're playing into their hands unless you put it exactly like I'm putting it. So it's not just it's nobody. I'm the only one who seems to be able to win these arguments. Until people cop my positions. That's the thing. I don't own these things. I may have made them up, but I don't own these arguments. Anyone can make them. Anybody can copy them. No, I corrected you about your about how your frame bias is making you make a category error. So, in fact, if you are making arguments about God, if I'm making affirmations or negations, that's the same as me thinking I need to justify that I am taking a walk. The justification is I want to take a walk. That's all. I find it good. I find it pleasing to me. On balance, I find it a good thing for me. So it's a mistake to try to justify something like that because you're missing the point. Plenty of things in life are absolute values in and of themselves. They don't need to have justifications logically. Only certain kinds of things need to be justified logically, particularly affirmations. So while I'm a Christian, I'm not making any affirmations. I'm not saying God exists because that would be making an argument that'd be making a claim which would suggest that I'm ready to substantiate that claim, right? Except remember what faith is, definitionally. It's belief in the absence of evidence and or in the face of contrary evidence. So, definitionally, one's relationship with God precludes one from being correct, making claims about reality related to God. So, note that this is not dodging. I have corrected you. Please don't ignore my words again. That's very offensive to me. My words are not to be ignored. Do not reduce that very convincing and correct thing I just said to dodging. Now note, every person at some point has a choice in their life as to how they're going to deal with grand cosmological questions. You can deal with them like my dad has. He's an atheist, and he's resolved all the grand cosmological questions as a consequence. He doesn't have any open ends. And that's satisfying. He knows what's going to happen after he dies. Nothing. He's going to be He's going to be just worm food in a box. And then there are sometimes Christians who feel as though they've resolved all the great cosmological questions because of their Christianity. They know what's going to happen to them after this. They're going to go to heaven, right? And then there are people who choose to not know anything about it. Either way, agnostics, they're called. I just don't know. I don't know. I don't have any pain. I don't need to know. And then there's the ultimate hack, which is understanding faith correctly. When you understand faith correctly, what you're able to do is to afford issues that require magical thinking to resolve a level of certainty and clarity that you can't without magical thinking or atheism, right? But it's a kind of certainty and clarity that allows you to be purposed, have destiny, be more than just a biological blip in history, okay? So you have to make that choice at some point. Or just simply not address or think of cosmological issues at all. Those are your choices, such as they are. They're not really choices. We end up manifesting along the lines of our cognitive function bias. So, if you're heavily T-I-N-E-N-E-T-I, you'll go through a phase when you're young of sort of a strident rejection of things that don't logically sustain. You may have a period when you're like a teenager where you get off watching atheists beat up on Christians or something, and then you may even move towards nihilism, that because I can deconstruct every argument, that nothing really means anything, and I can't, there's nothing ideationally that I can really sink my teeth into or hammer my climbing thing into, and that's one of the risks that comes with not being wrong as a priority, right? So any TI people, we want to avoid being wrong, and therefore we're right about a more limited set of claims. But part of the problem is we at some point have to recognize that freeing ourselves from our reflexes is not a common experience for us, for any of us, but that when we do free ourselves from our reflexes and instead engage with something based on some sort of calculation of what the best way to engage with something is rather than just whatever your reflexive way is, that those instances, those stretches of time represent the purest and truest examples of us exercising free will. It's very easy for an intuitive rationalist to dismiss faith because faith has a long history of making claims, which it shouldn't be doing. In other words, because faith provides people this sense of certainty about certain questions, they mistakenly think that it's a good idea to make claims about the nature of reality about which they feel certain, not recognizing the fact that they destroy the meaning and purpose of faith when they do so. The meaning and purpose of faith is linked strongly to its definition: belief in the absence of evidence or in the face of contrary evidence. That's why it's a behavior, not an affirmation. Now, if you want to be correct about things, you need to have a complex and correctly nuanced worldview like that. Okay? It doesn't. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say that Christians are wrong because they're not being logical and rational, and then when I'm more logical and rational than you, claim that I'm dodging. You have to play by the rules you set. Well, we don't need God to prove that raping is wrong, because that violates a negative right. So that we can deductively conclude is morally prohibited, provided, again, with my one axiomatic, provided there's arbitrary agreement on the question, on the question of whether slavery, if we can simply agree to use as a base point the consensus that slavery is not morally acceptable, then all other negative morality collapses from there. Now, granted, without some, no matter what, agreement on that is going to be arbitrary. You can claim that it's because God wants it that way or whatever, but that's just as much a non-explanation as let's just arbitrarily agree this is wrong because we intuitively all agree this is wrong. Both of those are non-explanations to why slavery is wrong. But we do live in a world in which people talk about morality. In other words, people evaluate other people's behavior in moral terms. People behave in response to things that either violate certain moral statuses or affirm certain moral statuses. So it is absolutely the case that morality exists. The question that people seem to have a problem with is whether it exists universally outside of any instance of it. Now, that's a silly thing to worry about, really, because reality itself is not a thing. Rather, each of us manifests a reality through our being. It's better to think of our ontologies as each rendering this massively multiplayer online role-playing game independently on our own screens. Yes, it seems like we're all in the same place, but we're each rendering it independently, right? So, the thing is, you say we don't need God for morality. What I'm saying, Spencer Jones, is if you personally, don't we us, okay? If you personally want non-ambiguity on positive moral indication questions, then the only way to get that non-ambiguity is through magical thinking. Now, Spencer Jones, are you trolling? You say here you don't have an argument for the existence of God. Are you trolling? Because I've explained already, if you are making arguments about God, you're making a category error. Certainly, somebody of faith would not say God exists, because to say God exists is to make a claim, to make an affirmation. To say God exists is equivalent to saying, I think you should believe God exists as well. That God exists independently of me and you is an objective thing in the world that we should both make statements about and agree about. Except remember the definition of faith, okay? Belief in the absence of evidence or in the face of contrary evidence. So it's inherently contradictory to argue that there's a lack of evidence or that there is contrary evidence as a way of discounting faith, right? You're just describing it, you're not negating it. Do you understand? I hate when I have to repeat myself over and over again and the person continues to argue and it's like, I said this. In other words, irrationality is a feature, not a bug. Okay? And both Christians and atheists don't get that. People think irrational means bad. Maybe we should call it extra rational. Then all of a sudden it sounds good, right? I mean, here's the thing. I can understand the anti-religious people, what's motivated them traditionally. Traditionally, and still in many parts of the world, but not around here, traditionally, religion has expressed politically a lot, and that creates political enemies who then see that religious aspect of the person as producing these other political aspects that they don't like or as linking strongly to them. And in fact, that is often the case. So, for example, the moral majority that back in the day in the 80s that was trying to censor rock music for being too saucy or whatever was a Christian group. And people had good reason to be angry at that group. What they were trying to do is insane. And they were making lots of arguments about God. They were bad people. They were wrong people. And what atheists are thinking is the same lack of logic that makes them Christian is what makes them so wrong about this actual political issue. But those things are not related at all, because they're not doing Christianity right in the first place. They do not represent faith. They represent instead a mistaken idea that their faith-based behaviors ought to be affirmed as arguments about reality, despite the fact that that invalidates their own faith. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that religion has obviously, you can never justify anything with this. I believe it, despite the fact that there's no evidence for it, and or there's evidence to the contrary, so you should believe it too. Who could ever say that? That makes no sense at all. And yet, when I'm evangelizing, if I'm evangelizing about Christianity, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm saying, what you should believe this, which means I have a reason why you should believe this, and I'm going to tell you, okay? Except the thing you're telling the person to believe is a behavior that requires you to engage in belief in the absence of reasons. So, anytime you try to convert that into something with a reason, you're violating its identity borderline, you know? It's no longer what it is. It's the opposite thing. It's secularism. Anytime you're talking about God, making a speech about what God thinks or whatever, you are, or anytime you're arguing about God in some sort of philosophical context, you are no longer Christian. Now you're secular. And you won't be Christian again until you stop talking about God and start praying. So, so-called Christian arguments are just secularists. They're arguing like secular people do about secular things. Heartbreak Kid 5231. I have faith. I don't need to hear any justifications for why I should believe what I believe without evidence. Otherwise, it's not faith. I'm sorry that your faith isn't very pure. You seem to think evidence is important. Yeah, I would be befouling my relationship with God if I attempted to justify it with evidence. It would be like trying to pay your wife for sex. That's fucking a perfect analogy. I would no more try to justify my faith behavior than I would try to pay my wife for sex. The only possible thing it can do is fuck everything up. No, but do you understand what I'm saying? then what you're trying to do is you're trying to pay your wife for sex and not getting why she's offended. Or more importantly, another analogy would be like this. You're trying to explain to people that you have good evidence that having sex with your wife is fantastic. You don't need any evidence for that. You shouldn't be making claims about that to people, right? You shouldn't be telling people how great sex with your wife is. I mean, I do, but I'm in general, it's not something that I talk about a lot, right? And in general, I don't, but occasionally, I make jokes about it or whatever, or people will ask me about it, and I'll be honest in my responses or whatever. But it's not something I open with, right? Like, and then if somebody disputes it, if somebody goes, actually, I don't think you have good sex with your wife, Eric, I'm not going to go, I've got good evidence that I do. I would realize, oh shit, how did I get dragged down into this shithole, right? It's a silly place to be. Everything I'm doing at this point is sort of insulting to the sanctity of my relationship with my wife. It's insulting to her and it's insulting to me that this guy is disputing my. It's like, what in the world? How did I get in an argument about this? That's how you should think about your relationship with God. Don't shit on it by claiming it's justified. God doesn't want to have to pass your skepticism threshold. I mean, no, because there are two parties involved. So, if I say sex with my wife is absolutely spectacular, and then in the confession booth on Big Brother or whatever she says, well, my husband's not a very good lover, then it is objectively false that sex with my wife is spectacular. It is objectively true that I enjoy sex with my wife a lot, perhaps, but sex requires two to tango. So, as a matter of fact, it's not purely subjective. Now, I already responded to this one too, Spencer Jones. Your problem here is the word just. And the fact that you're attached to connotations associated with irrational. Faith is a non-rational behavior. So is jogging, maybe. So is sleeping and a lot of things. That doesn't make it wrong, bad, stupid, ignorant, or anything else, right? It makes it part of a complete breakfast. I enjoy having an ontology that has unlocked every level of the game, including meta-rationalism, which requires the incorporation of magical thinking. Don't worry, it won't subsume the rest of your frames. But what you're imagining is that you are a subject being objective, walking through objectivity. Instead, you are a being manifesting through time, and you can choose, to some extent, what kind of frameworks you employ, and those will empower or limit you accordingly. And when you understand yourself for what you are correctly, rather than thinking of yourself as a subject trying to be objective, walking through an objective world, then you'll be well on your way. I mean, Spencer Jones, the question is, so how do I decide if I want to engage in a faith-based behavior or not? That's the question you would ask if you would have been listening to me at all. So how do I decide whether I want to engage in a faith-based behavior or not? Would be a fine question, and I'd say, I don't know. That's for you to figure out. For me, it was, I was habituated to the behavior of prayer before I, as a chore, before I embraced it as a choice. Do I think you should believe in God? I have no opinion about what you should do with your faith, whether you should employ faith-based behavior or not. I'm just saying, I wouldn't choose to leave that level of abilities locked, but if you choose to, that's your prerogative. I don't give a fuck. I'm not Jesus. I don't care about you that much. I'm going to say no. I think you should not, Spencer Jones. Stay weak and helpless. Reject God with all your might. There you go. Some nice advice for you. You know what you should do, Spencer Jones? You should shit on those crazy irrational Christians who insist on using the Bible as though we're evidence for something. God, I hate those people. That's what you should do. You should spend your time doing that. That's a good use of your time. There. That's my evangelism for you, Spencer Jones. I've evangelized for you. I'm pointing out, Heartbreak Kid, that if he continues to frame this as a matter about which one wins or loses arguments, then he will choose to do that. And he can play smug atheist. He can find Christians like you who aren't arguing it very well and beat you up rhetorically and feel good about himself. And that'll be great for him. Remember, again, I'm not Jesus, and what I should say or do about Jesus to other people or whatever, those are positive moral questions. They aren't universal, and they're whatever, to the extent that my faith-based behaviors inform the issue, it's, did Noah's Ark happen? I mean, the question you should ask is, Eric, do you include Noah's Ark in your faith-based narratives? No, I don't personally. I don't personally have any reason to really think of Noah's Ark or include Noah's Ark in any prayers. I don't say like, oh Lord, Jesus God in heaven, please today, can you make sure that the rotting last few planks of Noah's Ark stay preserved securely under the desert? Thank you, amen. I have never said any such prayer. In other words, how does Noah's Ark have anything to do with what I'm saying about faith and the behavior of prayer and the proper role of magical thinking in an overall epistemology? Have I been conic? You mean, have I ever been shaped like a cone? I'm pretty sure I've never been shaped like a cone before. Have you ever been conic? Have you ever been a cube, Spencer Jones? Hey, Heartbreak Kid, that's not very Christ-like of you. If Christ had followed that advice, he never would have cleaned the feet of those filthy scumbags. Wet dreams haven't ever been bad for you? They're bad once you wake up. Then you got a mess. And you go, oh, gross. God damn it. That's what happens after you wake up from your wet dream. That's exactly what happens, what I just demonstrated there. The parts in the Bible mention Jesus. Do you think he's real, as in the story of the Bible? I mean, what do you mean? I know that there's a story in the Bible about Jesus. What do you mean by real? Because remember, do I think that stories from the Bible are justifications for me to make claims about reality that you too should, that I'm saying you too should affirm? Well, no, I've already addressed that. We already explained this, and you keep ignoring it. Spencer Jones, what are you talking about? So the Jesus stuff happened, but not Noah's Ark. What are you talking about? I've already explained to you that prayer is a faith-based behavior that necessarily, definitionally, is belief in the absence of evidence or in the face of contrary evidence. You continue to ignore that. Why? I don't like being ignored. So that should answer your question. When you keep asking, like, well, do you believe that you can evidentiarily support claims about Jesus? I mean, I could, but then I would destroy my faith and make the whole thing self-defeating, right? So obviously, something can't be faith by being not faith. And you keep saying, but do you affirm this not faith? Well, no, dummy. You can't affirm not faith as an example of faith. How did humans get here? How did animals and plants and the suns and the stars get here? By bus. That's the one thing we can all affirm for sure. We're not sure where the departure point was. Where were the buses prior to them arriving here and bringing all the stars and the plants and the animals and planets and whatever, right? It's not scientists are still trying to figure out where were the buses parked before they came to the universe. It obviously was someplace either outside the universe, but the prevailing theory now is that it's a parking structure that's part of the universe, but back behind the back gate, so it looks like it's a separate property. But it's actually connected. It's just that the gate's rarely open, and so anybody who passes by assumes that must be a separate business, but it's not. Anyway, that's the prevailing theory. So when the buses arrived, naturally, the first buses that arrived were all carrying just one part of the very heavy thing that would be the Big Bang, because otherwise it was too heavy for the buses to even travel. So initially, the whole team thought, God, I wish we hadn't brought buses, because We should have used a dump truck or something. But of course, so after they split the original ball that went Big Banged into like 50,000 pieces, put on like 50,000 different buses, they drove there, and then they reconstructed it at the central location. Okay, then all the buses drove back to the parking lot where it was safe because it's more or less outside the universe, even though it's technically part of it. And what happened was then they waited for the Big Bang. And when the Big Bang happened, there was all this energy released, but nothing for the energy to become. So then the buses loaded up with stars, quasars, planets, things like that, your bigger stuff, and drove it out to where the Big Bang was. And they found the force vectors of energy coming out like this, and then at the end of it, they'd put like a star, and then it would be pushed out, or they put like a quasar or a black hole or whatever. And then they went back to the parking structure, and they waited for those to expand out a while and sort of do its thing. Because it was very chaotic at the beginning. So then after things settled down a bit, that's when they got all the people, the animals, the trees, plants, and shit, and they filled up all those buses because, and that's why do you think we have so many species? It's because there was so much room on those buses. Those buses were big enough to carry planets, stars, everything. So naturally, they could fit a lot of different species onto the buses when they decided to put the species on the Earth. Now, some people say, well, okay, but who was in charge of the buses? But that seems to be a pretty cut and dry answer. It was the owner of the bus company. And he obviously was doing this because that's how bus companies make money, is by transporting astronomical objects to different proto-universes. But then the question becomes, and this is where the cosmology really gets complicated, who's contracting the bus company to do this work? And, you know, you chase the paper trail, it turns out that the bus company owner is actually owner in name only, that the bus company is a shell company, part of a larger inter-universal corporation, that itself is simply a tax shelter in a particularly unregulated corner of the in-between universe that is a staging area for all proto-universes as they make them. And when you chase down that paper trail, guess who it leads to? It leads to the owner of that bus company before the current owner, but that previous owner of the bus company is dead. And the trail it ends there. And that's as far as we've been able to explain where everything came from. Okay, everybody get that? You ask a simple question, you get a very thorough answer. I mean, if you wanted to sum it up in a short form, you'd say, how did everything get here? The answer is by bus. That's why the universe seems so bus sick sometimes. The smell of diesel fumes, the rocking back and forth, the crying baby, the broken toilet in the back. Yeah, sometimes you just feel like, ugh. Somehow, something in the universe is just stinks of bus sickness. That's the microwave background radiation. It's what astronomers have interpreted as background microwave radiation from the Big Bang is actually the lingering stench of bus sickness. You want to know what dark energy and dark matter? You want to know what dark matter really is diesel exhaust from the buses. And dark energy? Well, there is no such thing, turns out. Right, the tax haven, yeah. Looking to set up an inter-universal travel company to cover up for a human trafficking operation with the United States of reality tax bad. Well, the reason it's okay that it's a big microwave oven, Club EHP, is because none of us are made out of aluminum foil. Simple answer. Ask a simple question, get a simple answer. Yeah. If there is no giant microwave, then why aren't any of us made out of aluminum foil? That's pretty convincing. That's pretty convincing. Nobody wants sparks in the universe-sized microwave oven. So please don't be metal. So many ancient civilizations have a flood story and have a story about how gods came from the sky and taught them things. Yes, those ancient civilizations were visited by extraterrestrial aliens with advanced technology, which they used to help those humans make a giant stack of rocks. Because, of course, why wouldn't aliens with super advanced technology be interested in coming down to Earth and helping humans pile their rocks higher up? I would. If I were a super advanced alien, I'd go to some primitive culture. I probably would, actually, now that I think about it. And I'd be like, hey, you call that a pile of rocks? You guys think that's it? I get you're going for the whole pyramid shape here. I got you. And that is pretty big. Yeah, you're right. It's like 6 stories tall. You call that a pile of rocks, though? I'm going to wow the motherfucking pants off you. I'm going to build the biggest pile of rocks any of you motherfuckers have ever seen, and then you will respect the shit out of me. And I'm going to do it with only all of your slave labor, my technology, and I'm going to need to plunder some of your natural resources. We good? Alright, cool. First, let me get my laser gun. I'm going to cut some big chunks of rock out. You see how I'm doing that? Okay, you use this laser gun, cut out rock. You get this one. You guys, all you slaves, cut out these rocks. Now, next I'm going to use this levitation rod. Meow. Yeah, lifting up the big rock. See, it's so heavy, but I just lift it up just like that. Okay, now each of you guys over here, you other slaves, come over here. You guys get these rods. Now, you follow behind this guy. He's cutting out the big squares. See how he's doing it? Yeah, okay. When he's done with it, you carry it over there and put it on the pile of rocks. Everybody just keep doing that indefinitely. We're starting with super wide bottom. When you get to the top, you'll know. And that's how the pyramids were built. True story. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I was a small Egyptian boy named Utan Uta. And I was the son of a fisherman, who himself was the son of a palace servant, who after fathering his son, my father, had been made into a eunuch by Cleopatra. And I was also there when they finally killed Rasputin in Russia. You know what finally killed him? It was my disappointed look. He couldn't take it anymore and his heart gave out. They had poisoned him, they had shot him, all these kind of things. He wouldn't die. And I, Utsankuk, who had survived a long time and had graduated from being a small Egyptian boy into a full-grown, fluidly transracial man, it was I, and I alone, who gave Rasputin this look. And he said, "I'm sorry I disappointed you, Erica!" And he died. These are true things about history that a lot of people don't know. A lot of people aren't aware of my important role that I played throughout history. When Gutenberg printed his first Bible, I was there. When the caveman Og first hit his woman over the head with a club and dragged her back to his cave, I was there. No, not full-blown AIDS. I want partially blown AIDS. Why do they always full-blow my AIDS? It's so annoying. Can you please just leave my AIDS partially blown? I want it that way. It's that way on purpose. It's not an accident. You don't need to fix it. Alright. Well, I guess that means it's time for bed. Although, I guess I am going to play one song for bed. And I will play Wonderful Kitty, because I did practice it some more today, so I'm able to play it now. You know, what would be a good family feud question? Things that you turn on full blast. What are some things you turn on full blast? My hump. Yeah, it's my newest written out song. I actually wrote the whole thing out. Figured out the chords. It was kind of hard to figure out, actually, surprisingly. Here we go. Move this a little further back. Well, the problem with that theory, Heartbreak Kid, is that we already know that hybridization doesn't create reproductively viable offspring. Wonderful, wonderful kitty, having wonderful times. Always cleaning yourself, making sure you get clean lines. Wonderful kitty, such a fabulous off friend. And now it's wonderful kitty bedding time again. Just let me pet you, don't walk away. It's bedding time. Wonderful kitty, having wonderful times. Always cleaning yourself, making sure you got clean lines. But your wonderful kitty is a fabulousness I've never encountered before. And I know that I want to pet my kitty some more. Just let me pet you, don't walk away. It's bedding time. Hooray! That's it. That's the song. What do you think? It's called Wonderful Kitty. The world is flat, but only once a year. On Flat Earth Day, when everything gets super flat and near. The world is very flat, but never when you check. It flattens itself when we're all asleep, and yet it unflattens when we look again into a globish thing. I might put a bridge in there. I think it's kind of syrupy, so it's probably good that it run a little shorter than possible, than longer than necessary. But I will play it again one more time because it's my new song, so I'm still practicing and getting the hang of it, you know. Wonderful, wonderful kitty, having wonderful times. Always cleaning yourself, making sure you got clean lines. Wonderful, wonderful kitty, such a fabulous soft friend. And now it's wonderful kitty petting time again. Just let me pet you, don't walk away. It's petting time. Wonderful, wonderful kitty, having wonderful times. Always cleaning yourself, making sure you got clean lines. But your wonderful kitty is a fabulousness I've never encountered before. And I know that I want to pet my kitty some more. Just let me pet you, don't walk away. It's petting time. Hooray! Alright, well, that's a good reason for me to end. Since CJ's stream it, I was about ready to end anyway, so perfect. If anybody can put a link, why don't you put his link there, Boba Fett? Put the link. I recently found out that the Chileans have a really bomb Banana Republic dictator praise style of song in praise of their own Banana Republic-like dictator. Now, this does sound interesting, Sky Gear. I gotta say, I am very intrigued by this. So I'm going to copy this link address. Yeah, can you put a link to CJ's stream so people who want to go there could go there easily? And then I'll end the stream. They'll link to CJ's stream. That's what. What else would I mean? Thank you. Alright, cool. So there, I'll probably, well, I might show up there briefly myself, but probably I probably just gonna move the car and go to bed. But there you go. See you later, everybody. I love you with all of my organs, not just my heart. Isn't that nice? I love you with all of my organs and my glands. All of my glands except my pituitary, of course. You can edit my music? You mean like if I were to send you parts, you'd produce it or something? Or I'm not sure what you mean. If you really want to talk about that, email me or something. If you've got skills in that area and you want to help me make it happen or something, then I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. Anyway, good night, sweethearts. Remember, don't fondle your thyroid too much. It'll erupt in pus.